Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Diehl. I'm currently the president of the Interreligious Council of Linn County. On this morning's show, we're going to be discussing the topic, the pros and cons of globalization. And here to discuss this interesting topic, I have three guests with me this morning. And before we jump into it, I'd like for each of you to just introduce yourselves, what you do, and why this particular topic is important to you.
I am Dimy Doresca. I'm the director of the Institute for International Business at the University of Iowa. And I teach international business. And this topic really interests me because I've been seeing the shift in the definition of globalization for a while now.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Drew Westberg. I'm Associate Professor of Economics at CO. And I teach economic development, but I also teach urban economics and study really just economic development practice. And certainly the events of the last several years have really caused us to rethink a great deal of that.
Thank you, Drew.
Hello, my name is Alison Bianchi, and I'm an associate professor of sociology and the director for the Center for the Study of Group Processes at the University of Iowa. I'm a social psychologist, so I'm very interested in these big global trends that have an effect on one's identity, on one's understanding of social status and power relations within societies. Globalization absolutely has an effect on these.
Thank you, Alison. And again, thank you all for joining us this morning. So before we jump into it, I'd like to maybe just give a brief definition of what we mean when we say globalization. And so just pulling from Wikipedia, the process of interaction and integration among people, companies, and governments worldwide. So I think that's probably the simplest way to put it. And I think the reason that it's important, obviously over the last couple years, we've gone through a worldwide pandemic or are going through a worldwide pandemic and have also been witness to now the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And so what I'd like to do here is just get your thoughts as a way to get into this conversation around how has the last couple years, the pandemic, and now more recently the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, how has that impacted the trend of globalization or the interaction amongst peoples? Just give our audience what your view of that is to get us started. And that's for anybody that would like to jump in.
Well, I'll start. And I'll get us started. Then
there we go. Thank you.
Yeah. You know, globalization is in my international business class is really the second module that I teach, and I always tell my students the world is what it is today because of globalization. We've seen the birth of the internet. We've seen the birth of social media. We've seen how communication has become so easy now in the world that we have to be thankful of globalization. However, in the last few years, what we've seen is globalization is being redefined. First, when the pandemic arrived, we saw a lot of companies, a lot of countries rather in the world trying to find ways to be more self-sufficient by find ways of producing their own food, by manufacturing their own goods, by find ways to conduct education in a manner that is more adapted to their communities. And which is really, it shows them that in a matter of a few days, the world can be shut down. Then we have to find a ways to be self-sufficient, to provide for ourselves. At the same time, they also take advantage of one aspect of globalization to bring the world to them using the internet. I have conducted many webinars in the past 2.5 years. A lot of the participants of those webinars, they are located in several countries across the world, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa. A lot of schools in sub-Saharan Africa are inviting me to be guest speakers. So while countries are trying to be self-sufficient on one aspect, but on other aspect, they are capitalizing on the fact that the world is interconnected. There is the internet. There is the fast, high-speed internet. Technology is widespread with respect to Zoom and other medium. They are trying to take advantage of that to bring the world to them. So that's the one thing that I see. Now, when the war in Ukraine, it's really, this short amount of time, you usually see this kind of events generations after generation, not even generation. You saw COVID happen, then the war in Ukraine happened. Countries started thinking, well, we thought we could be building kind of like small alliance, because we share border, we can create alliance because we thought we could do that. Now countries now are thinking, what are the ways we can make our stand stronger in the world? Not by being by ourselves, not by aligning ourselves only with our neighbors, but what are the ways we can be better integrated in this world to become safer? So that's really, those are the 2 points. My colleagues here, they, feel free to jump in, but those are the 2 main points I want to bring. Within like 2.5, 3 years, we saw globalization being redefined right before our eyes. So I'll stop right there and let my colleagues jump.
Yeah, Drew and Alison, go for it. What thoughts you have there from what Dimy said?
Yeah, Dimy uses exactly the right word, self-sufficiency, right? Or I guess the hyphenated word. In 1933, Keynes writes this essay called On National Self-Sufficiency. And he is articulating a strategy of economic development that diverges from then the strategy that was sort of the conventional wisdom at the time, which is very much what we've come back to. The argument before World War I was very much, if we integrate the global economy, we'll all be safer. We won't have these conflicts because the economic interests will be just too strong. And after a decade plus of sort of looking at the impact of this war on the British economy, he sort of escapes from that line of thinking, and he comes back to a much more domestic-oriented, nationalist-oriented view. And that can be kind of summarized in this one sentence. He says, ideas, knowledge, science, hospitality, travel. These are the things which should be of their nature international. But let goods be homespun whenever it is reasonably and conveniently possible. And above all, let finance be primarily national. And so it really is at this call that we need to do a much better job of figuring out what our economies are for and who they are for, and how we ensure that the national interests are being met, so that when these global shocks happen, we don't have the extraordinary supply chain conflicts and struggles that we have across the globe. And so I think that there's some real synergy there between Keynes and what Dimy's articulating there.
Very good. So yeah, I mean, I think there's an interesting point that you've brought up here, and y- on the one hand, globalization has increased opportunity for many people and has raised the boats, inarguably, right, for the entire world over the last century or so. Uh, but it seems to come at the risk of losing identity, losing people feeling as if they're losing certain status in the world because they have that visibility. We see that, right, being played out in Ukraine right now. Do you feel as if it's a kind of zero-sum game in that sense? Can nations retain their identity? And what that means, while at the same time being integrated fully into the world economy?
From a social psychological perspective, it's pretty challenging, right? I agree with everything that was said, and there's a lot of opportunity with globalization. But the question becomes, from the sociological as well as the social psychological perspective, opportunities for whom? The people that benefit the most from these globalized are those that are the educated, those who have the technological skills to embark in the internet and the opportunities that are there. And those that don't are kind of left out of this global economy. And because of this kind of global marketplace, I think that the concept of the nation state has really weakened. And when there's weakening of nation states and there's people falling out of their economy, this creates a real anxiety amongst certain groups, right? And so the backlash to globalization for some groups is nationalism, right? Or like almost jingoism, like uber nationalism, right? In order to regain what they feel like they've lost with when nationalities were strong, for example. And so it's challenging because as we become a more global economy, a more global society, I don't really see institutions that are kind of meeting the challenges of that. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg put us all on Facebook, and there's almost no accountability. There's almost no institutions that kind of help us protect from the negative aspects of the ability to interact with whomever, right? I mean, it's amazing that you can, like Dimy said, he can open up a Zoom account and suddenly have a conference with people all around the world instantaneously. And what a great opportunity for a diversity of ideas. The more ideas you have, the better solutions you're going to have to business problems, economic problems. I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity. But if you don't have access to Zoom, if you don't know how to use Zoom, if you're not, kind of tied in, it's not an opportunity. It's a threat. It's a threat to your economic security. And that's why I would argue there's nationalist movements, not just in the United States, we can see them all over the world, in Hungary, in the Philippines, in India. I mean, there's a real backlash to globalization from certain parts of the economies. And so I ask about globalization. Yes, opportunities, but opportunities for whom? And how do we create institutions that protect people from the negative aspects of globalization, both at the individual level and at the national level? I think that those are the big challenges, because we're going to need it. We're going to need globalization if we're going to solve climate change, if we're going to be able to better coordinate in the next pandemic. We're going to need these kind of institutions to bring us together, but we also are going to start to learn to be a little more tolerant of each other as well.
Yeah, if I can follow up on that, Alison and Alan, to maybe, I think part of one of the things that maybe we're taking for granted is that globalization has been widely successful.
Right.
We have this idea, and we measure it by income per capita, that income per capita has gone up across the board, outside of maybe a couple of small, not small, but a couple of specific regions in the globe. And that's certainly true. That's largely dominated by China and India. And so when we look at sort of the development or the growth in the economies, we say, okay, yeah, globalization has been really good. But as hopefully all of my principles of macro students remember, that GDP measures lots of stuff, and not all of it's really good. And so there's some other measures we might look at. We might look at life expectancy, which has gone up. And that's probably the best thing we can say about globalization and capitalism, is that life expectancy does seem to have risen across the board, with the smallest benefits to sub-Saharan Africa. But if we look at vulnerable workers and the share of vulnerable workers that have changed, there's hardly been any benefit in the percent of vulnerable workers in the poorest countries, to Alison's point. If we look at the cost of food, and the actual cost of food, if we look at it on probably a better measure, is about $5 a day. And in that case, 80% of sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia are still unable to meet that threshold. In other words, they would be considered poor. But here's one that I think is a little bit easier for us to grab hold of. The proportion of the population across the globe that is able to eat more than 2,100 calories a day has actually, the proportion of the population that can't access at least 2,100 calories a day has increased by 33% since 1984. So when we think of different measures that really do describe the well-being of people, I'm not really sure that globalization has been all that it's been made out to be.
You know what I think I agree with a lot of what you both mentioned, okay, Alison and Drew. What I think is happening, a lot of the leaders of different countries, they are more interested in globally integrated world more than a locally responsive world. And I think you need to find a happy medium. To be really taking advantage of globalization, you have to find a way to be locally responsive in providing the right type of safety nets for your people that will not be able to get the benefits of globalization right away. You need to give them time, provide them the right kind of training that they need to take advantage of globalizations. And I agree with Alison when she was mentioning, yeah, you find a lot of people that are not computer literate, that don't even know how to turn on or off a PC, okay? Providing the right type of training so people can catch up, providing the right kind of training so they can, if they lose their job due to globalization, they can re-enter the job market with new skill sets, new training that can help them take advantage of the opportunities of the future. Okay. And again, that also requires a time. You need to provide them, a food and shelter for an extended period of time until they can be by themselves. You find countries with responsible leadership, by the way, that manage to balance the two, the global integration and local responsiveness. When you take a country like the United Arab Emirates, okay, so with that has issues, that found oil 50 years ago, and you take other countries in sub-Saharan Africa that have discovered oil at around the same time, the way that United Arab Emirates managed to integrate itself with the rest of the world while at the same time be locally responsive, it's just amazing. And there are examples of other countries. But I wanted to tell you the question is globally integrated while at the same time be locally responsive.
Yeah, I just want to say I totally agree with that, Dimy. I think that the global opportunities, again, like Drew said, are something that tend to be emphasized. But at the same time, the local systems do need to be propped up, especially the education systems, if I dare say, as an educator. for example, this week, the United States is having a shortage on baby formula. Who thought that something like that was going to happen, right? And so now the FDA has deputized certain agencies to reopen factories that provide those kind of things, right? So these kind of surprising shortages and surprising holes in the economy have really revealed themselves, right? Ever since globalization got that shock of the Ukrainian war, and even the trade war with China. So, so I think that balance is crucial, and I do think a strengthening of some of the local institutions, like I would say, education, local governments, for that kind of, like you said, Dimy, responsible leadership, I think is going to be key.
So, quick question on that. So, local responsiveness. I like that idea, certainly of striking that balance. I guess the question becomes, how does a country, what is the most efficient way for a country to become more locally responsive? So, Alison, you mentioned, for instance, education. So, a country may have lack the resources to properly educate their populace. How do they do they educate their populace more quickly by leveraging, let's say, via the internet, other resources countries may have, or teachers or educational opportunities, universities, etc.? Or are we saying that they need to kind of pull themselves up by their bootstraps, figure out how to develop their own resources so that they can become more self-reliant in times in which they, for whatever reason, a pandemic or a world war may isolate them? So that's kind of my question there. How is globalization still the answer there, or is there something else we're not thinking about?
Well, I would say, resources are available all over the world. Okay. And we can put infrastructure in place to take advantage of those resources. And if there's one thing that the pandemic has taught us is, we working from home, capturing human resources that are 1,000 miles, 3,000 miles away from you. That's not a problem. Now, what you need to do, though, is you need to listen to your people. You need to understand that there are people that the jobs of today and of tomorrow will put them out of jobs. They will need to be retrained. They will need to be part of a strong social safety net so they don't feel left out. So you don't see all these nationalist movements, all these anti-globalization movements come and try to tell you globalization is bad. Globalization in and of itself is a good thing if it's being handled in a country by responsible leaders. The way it's done is you provide this social safety net, you provide the retraining, you provide the adapted training so people can reinsert themselves into the new opportunities that globalization brings. I think, and when you're doing those type of training, don't limit yourself to opportunities that are to only facilities that exist in your own countries. There are other places that you can go and find those resources to train your people.
I think that's the training component is certainly important. But when we look at, just look at the upper Midwest in the United States. It's been gutted by globalization and trade policies that didn't really take it into account much. And from administrations on both parties, and
Right.
we didn't really solve that problem. I think one of the bigger challenges that COVID in particular laid bare, because that's when the supply chain stuff really started, is that globalization has led us to this incredibly lean manufacturing style economy, where all production of certain things are happening in very specific places, and as a result, this concentrates market power. and it concentrates political power. And I think one of the things that we're really seeing here across the globe is this big fight about the distribution of power and the distribution of our resources.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to jump right on what Drew just said, and I was actually going to suggest that maybe one of the solutions to globalization is local democracy, and to really sustain those kinds of institutions. Mm-hmm. The dirty word that Drew doesn't want to say, and I'll say it, is deindustrialization. That's kind of what happened to the upper Midwest, and it's been happening in a lot of developed countries. It was just cheaper to have manufacturing happen in other places, and that really helped those economies, right? But it certainly hurt us, and so training and also more empowerment of local governance, I think, is in a democratic way, I think, is the way to do it. And I'm going to put a plug in for democracy. I think that it's kind of under threat right now because of a lot of these forces, but I think that despite the fact that it takes a little bit of time, it may be the most efficient way to organize that responsible leadership that Dimy is talking about.
So we just have about 2.5 minutes left, and so I think I'll take the risk of introducing a very large topic and hopefully have you be able to distill it down to a soundbite for us. But again, what we're dealing with the invasion of the Ukraine is just a bit of a paradox, right? On the one hand, you have Russia, integrated with the world from a fossil fuel, if you will, standpoint, to the ability to and all the benefits it brings, but at the same time they feel to some degree their identity under threat. Do you feel that globalization, on the balance, does lead to a more peaceful world, or will continue to lead to a more peaceful world, or is there something new on the horizon? So we got 2 minutes, so jump in, but keep in mind. Whoever would like to go.
We'll go fast.
Yep.
No, I don't think the globalization by itself is going to generate a world that is any more or less safe. I think fundamentally what we've got is we have national level institutions that are failing across the globe. And from my vantage point, it's because we've forgotten how to use our monetary systems for our countries, and we've gotten too caught up in the global financial system.
I'm going to second that and say that it's not just going to be about globalization, but I as ineffective as the United Nations has been, I think we need more institutions that will help coordinate a lot of the things that we could benefit from. Like, we could really use a win, right? With some kind like a Paris Accords treaty that's got a little more teeth in it for climate change, or some other way to bring the world together that might help with Russia, right? To include them, even though right now it seems almost impossible. But I do think eventually we all have to come together to solve some of these big things. And I hope it doesn't take another pandemic to do it. Yeah.
Well, Dimy, I would love to give you time. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but this has been a very interesting conversation. Remains to be seen how the world unfolds. We'll hope for the best. But again, I appreciate everybody joining us this morning and our panelists, and hopefully have a great rest of your day. Take care now. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.